And my children are now at school. Sorry. My children are now at school, and it's not really good enough, is it? It's awful sending them back to school before you can even vaccinate them. It's awful sending them back to school when there's inadequate compliance with mask wearing. And I live in a place where there's high compliance with mask wearing. And they've debated a vaccine mandate and said, yes, let's go ahead with that, a vaccine mandate for teachers and staff. But it's not being enforced yet. It's not being implemented yet. And I have children under 12, so it's hard. And I'm going to say it's hard, even though I know it's still yet harder for other people. Other people are having to send their children to school where there's even less compliance with any of the CDC recommendations and less compliance with vaccine mandates, and sometimes even Republican governor initiated banning of mandates. Speaking of Republican controlled institutions, there's also Texas, and I promised to talk about Texas because Texas is not only banning abortions before 6 weeks, when 6 weeks after conception, many women have not yet even missed a period or have only just missed a period. So I should clarify, definitely will have just missed one period. And so may be completely unaware that they're pregnant, but they find out, nope, you can't obtain a termination of your pregnancy in Texas. And there's also a $10,000 bounty for people to try to report you or anybody who helps you. Now, I had 2 children willingly, and it involved a lot of effort on my part. People sometimes might subscribe to a naturalistic fallacy whereby they think it's natural, so it's easy. If you're trying to be a responsible parent and a responsible mother, there's a lot of sacrifices to still make. Give up types of cheese, give up various forms of eating out, try and emotionally navigate a path you're comfortable with between the people who frown at you for taking exercise, and then also knowing yourself that modern research says exercising is good and helps condition your muscles, and can even make labor, the process of going through labor, easier for you. Labor is a difficult thing for human beings, female human beings, to go through, because human brain capacity has been critical to the advancement and survival of the human race. So humans have big brains, and their human female parents have relatively small pelvises compared to the cranium size of the skulls that house these evolutionary mandated big brains. Those skulls are hard things to push through your cervix. Okay, why is that not working? Sorry, just trying to check on my. Is that better? No. Don't have battery yet. Oh, Knowledge is here. Knowledge says hello. Hi, Knowledge. It's so fun to say hello to you because that's a fun name. All right. Just working on, as you see, I have adapters because I'm not initially from America. So my electronic devices. No. Oh, man, that does mean my computer will run out of power. All right. And Pablo's here. Hi, Pablo. What I might do is start playing a video. I always think it's very important to force ourselves to look at some of the less pleasant things. It's important to hear the extremes, and it's important to not just dismiss racism and ignorance as being something geographically specific to southern states, because insightful people have pointed out that it's a big facilitator of white supremacy that people in northern states make the false assumption that racism, ignorance, discrimination is restricted to southern states, because that's not at all the case. And if it was the case, then there wouldn't still be the Republican ability to sabotage infrastructure for various states across the United States. There's a lot of pervasiveness of what I will call conservative ideas. The idea that social programs should be limited because they're not worth that much, or social programs and infrastructure should be limited because they're not worthwhile investments. They're a drain on the public purse, and they're part of taxation, which is potentially best viewed as theft from individuals. And look, I don't want to be extremist in any direction. I think a more moderate centrist point of view that I would like Americans to coalesce around is the idea that taxation shouldn't be an open invitation to collect from income earners or wage earners. Yes, there should be oversight. Yes, checks and balances are important. But to falsely frame taxation as theft is to ignore the collective nature of human existence, and to ignore the innovative nature of human existence, the innovative, creative way that we generate value and we make resources out of nothing. For example, the resource of what's in the ground, oil and gas. And if we hadn't created technology and we hadn't developed scientific knowledge of how you can use those substances to create fossil fuel energy, then those resources would still be black stuff in the ground. Now, there's a lot of emotional dysfunction around the fact that, yes, it was a human achievement to be able to extract black stuff from the ground and turn it into an energy source that propels transportation devices, that fuels light at nighttime when the sun has gone down, that fuels a lot of the magic of modern human existence in developed countries and developing countries. It's not as if electricity is unheard of, even in the third world. But there's a lot of emotional dysfunction in relation to having to accept the shadow side, having to accept that there is a downside to our ability to extract and use fossil fuels. And the downside is the drunk on power and drunk on irresponsible and destructive exercise of that power amongst petrochemical billionaires and petrochemical influencers who know that what they're doing is increasing disasters, increasing weather-related disasters for humanity, increasing crop failure, increasing temperatures, increasing torrential rains, increasing droughts, increasing dryness that facilitates more wildfires. Okay, now at this point, I'm either going to have to go because of my, Peter's here too. So we've got Peter and Pablo. And please forgive me, I'm just still fiddling a little bit with my source of energy, even as I talk about electricity. So I'm going to play this video. It's a woman at the Seminole County, Florida school board meeting today, apparently covering concentration camps, ivermectin, Bill Gates, Fauci, FDA, CDC, Pfizer, and Abigail Adams. So that's 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Let's see how I go in fixing my power problem.
It is so sad. Pro-maskers are touting death rates in hospitals as excuses to mask kids. they look into what's really causing these deaths, hospital protocols. Vitamin infusions in hospitals, ivermectin, HCQ. Why? Because it's not accepted by the National Institute of Health. Why? These drugs have been around for years and have been used worldwide. Why won't they use them? Follow the money. That is what we need to do. Okay? And it's cheap. Ivermectin is cheap. Why doesn't it work? Wink, wink. Follow me now. Agencies like the CDC and FDA do not work for the American taxpayers. They are non-profit corporations that work for companies, politicians, and individuals like Bill Gates. For years, complaints have been lodged against these agencies for the relationships between them and the company they are supposed to regulate. Let's think about that. And they sit on Pfizer's board. It's a revolving door of Washington cronyism, and you have to follow their corrupt marching orders. Really? The CDC has plans from 2019 detailing concentration camps. They call it shielding. It's on their website. Look it up. It's how to break up families. Would you support that too? How about mandatory vaccines for school? Just recommended that this week. Are you going to vote yes on that too? When does it end? When it ends, when tyranny becomes law and rebellion becomes duty. American patriot, First Lady Abigail Adams, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice. I add that we will not be bound by any law that is corrupt and pose serious harm to our children, because the only thing for the triumph of
so when she got to the only thing for evil to triumph is the failure to act of good people, some version of that. So Pablo's in Los Angeles, Peter's in Colorado, and Pablo makes the remark, just wish they didn't tax the young so much just for not having dependents. That's an interesting angle that I'm unfamiliar with, being a recent migrant to the United States, and I have dependents. So you get extra charges for not having dependents. Yes, well, my husband's on Twitter as well, and he reads comments from people in the financial FinTwit circles. And apparently a lot of their response to the Texas situation was to say, well, some of them who live in Texas feel that they have no choice. They're more socially liberal, but they don't want to pay the tax rates of California. And so they live in Texas, a Republican and therefore a tax minimalist state. Even as the extremist Christian influence in the legislature, in the Republican governed Texas legislature, becomes so extreme that there is a $10,000 bounty for people to report women who might be seeking to terminate a pregnancy. And this is where I just wanted to touch on the emotional side for a woman of not wanting to proceed with a pregnancy, of having accidentally conceived, whether that just be through contraceptive failure, and that happens. Who's ever had contraception fail on them the first time they ever engaged in sexual activity? Me. Didn't fall pregnant, but that's luck of the draw. That's any type of sexual activity to a degree is playing Russian roulette with your own personal fertility and the fertility levels of your sexual partner, who may or may not have emotionally pressured you into the sexual activity to start with, because nature has a mechanism for looking out for the survival of the human race, and that mechanism is pleasure-seeking neural circuitry, I guess. We have it, and we all have it, and yes, the self-appointed guardians of the social fabric say the best way to guard that social fabric is to have punitive consequences on some humans, a subset of humans, the humans that can fall pregnant. So men also engage in sexual activity, and their participation is key and is critical to conception. Can't conceive, fertilize an egg without a DNA contribution from a man outside of a laboratory as of yet. And yes, women are already blessed, and both blessed and punished with all of the corollaries of fertility. We have periods and menopause and all that type of thing, but we also are the gatekeepers of whether or not to proceed with creating human life. And there's various avenues we can pursue and have pursued across history to end a pregnancy. And people have taken medicines. Abortifacients means a substance that's used to try and terminate a pregnancy. Historically speaking, the Christian church wasn't fussed about abortion as long as it occurred before the quickening. You can actually feel a baby kick your insides. When is the quickening? Let's have a look and find out when that is. The quickening pregnancy. Quickening is defined as the first movements of the fetus felt in utero. It occurs from the 18th to the 20th week of pregnancy. Movements have been felt as early as the 10th week, and in rare cases are not felt during the entire pregnancy. So the Christian church and the Catholic church used to be cool if you took something, ingested some herbs, or I don't know, tried hot bath remedies, as long as you hadn't felt little baby feet pummeling your insides. Kind of feels like little butterfly kicks to start with, from recollection, having been pregnant twice. I've been pregnant twice. I've had two children. I have two children. It's been a pretty clean run for me, and I'm grateful. Statistically, it seems fairly unusual that I've managed to avoid being seriously sexually assaulted. I've avoided being raped, and I've managed to avoid miscarrying, and I've managed to avoid having abortions, and I've managed to avoid losing any child in childbirth or stillborn. So that's lucky. But I appreciate when I hear stories from other women that they've been in a position where they would have done anything to end a pregnancy. They knew they weren't ready. They didn't want to bring a child into the world. They just couldn't countenance being pregnant. And so they tried every avenue possible. And I think the number of dead women pre-Roe v. Wade in America is a powerful testament to that desire, to that compulsion to pursue ending a pregnancy, even at the potential cost of your own life. And in countries where abortion is illegal, there is a significant increase in the suicide rate for young women and older women. Just female suicide rates are much higher because women who don't want to be responsible for bringing another life in the world will kill themselves before that baby is born, rather than be forced to inflict suffering on a child when they don't want to. And I guess that's just a function of women's knowledge of how much they have to give. So I guess compelling men to get support is a legal recognition that men don't necessarily give as much of themselves physically in relation to gestating children. They're not growing a child inside a body. Nobody can compel them to do that. But we do compel men to make financial contributions. That is a legal thing. Would men be more supportive of abortion rights if there was no legal compulsion to contribute to bringing up children? I don't think so. I'm speculating about it because I'm sure there's some men out there saying we'd be less punitive of female bodily autonomy. with regards to female bodily autonomy, as long as you gave us the freedom to just walk away from a child if we didn't want to participate in bringing up a child. But nobody can compel you legally to spend time with a child, to spend time caring for a child, if you're a parent who abandons their child. But you can still be compelled by the state to give up some of your money. Your wages can be garnished. You can just have the state extract a proportion of your pay to be sent to whoever is taking care of your child. So Cybergrief says the Texas law will cost more lives than it saves. It will certainly cost a lot of sentient lives, because I'm a trained speech pathologist, so I've encountered research that says children do some learning in the womb, that even before you take breath independently of your mother, you are processing information and you are learning to recognize the sound of familiar voices. You are learning to discriminate between various speech sounds, which speech pathologists call phonemes, so that the phonemes of your native language are more familiar to you when you emerge from the womb than are the phonemes or speech sounds of a different language. So I also know that I've attended baby showers, and they're not fetus showers. We as a society still make an effort to collectively recognize the humanity of unborn children, even when they're still, in a legal sense, just a fetus. So I appreciate some of the motivating emotions of the pro-life people. But there is one quote which I think is a very effective summary, a very potent and emotional summary. And it's a quote from the Lincoln Project. Pablo, thanks for giving me an Appreciate Award. Much appreciated in return. Kim is also here and says hi, so lovely to see you, Kim. So the Lincoln Project quote is that the Texas GOP preaches values they don't believe to supporters they don't care about in an attempt to rally them against enemies that don't exist so they can pass laws they cannot defend. They're after one thing: real, raw political power. So I found that quote so extremely efficient in its characterization of the situation. Values that the Texas GOP doesn't actually have: caring about people, caring about human life, to supporters they don't care about, because a lot of GOP policies, including this, will harm GOP voters, in an attempt to rally them against enemies that don't exist. Yes, Democrats are often mischaracterized as being baby haters, when Democratic policies are often pro-social policies that exist in an effort to raise up the collective well-being of children and families and women and everybody, not to endow women with some made-up rights at the expense of innocent unborn babies. It's to help it's to support them and prevent obstacles from women making their own decisions about growing a child in their body, growing a child to completion. And I don't think it's a naturalistic fallacy on my part to say the existence of abortion efforts across time show that this is very intrinsic to being a woman, that you understand that as the gatekeeper of life, you can choose to grow it, or while it's still growing in your body, you should be able to sabotage that process without calling it murder. That when you have a 6-week-old non-sentient zygote in your body, you should be able to choose to end that process, so that it's voluntary and of your free will that you go forward with that, with what's happening inside your body. And that separation of church and state mean it's okay for the state to recognize that outside of religious teachings, civilized people recognize that it's torture to compel a woman to proceed with something that she adamantly doesn't want to do. You can abandon your family, you can walk away from your family, and you might still have the legal obligation to pay money and have your wages garnished for child support. Nobody compels you to stay with a family, and nobody should be able to compel you to grow a family member when you desperately don't want to. Cybergrief says, I am on the side of women and their rights to their own bodies. Thank you, Cyber. Very enlightened of you. I'm just going to look at female suicide rate in countries where abortion is illegal. Rape and abortion ban drives pregnant teens to suicide in El Salvador. That's a Reuters article. I think the World Health Organization recognizes that making abortion illegal is torture. They classify that as a form of torture, because imagine the emotional torture. And it's difficult to imagine. It didn't come intuitively to me till I read about the case of a 17-year-old saying, I was pregnant, it was my own fault, I wasn't raped, I wasn't coerced, I just did a foolish thing and became pregnant. So exactly the kind of thing that a lot of people say, well, we should punish that and to discourage it. Be forced to continue with that pregnancy and marry the person you had sexual intercourse with, and that will be a deterrent to other people, and that is the just consequence for you. And she said, I would have done anything. She would have thrown away her whole life and existence in her pursuit of ending that pregnancy, because it was inconceivable to her that she could bring a child into the world at that point. And pro-forced birth people would say, well, that's what we're about. We want to make it inconceivable that you would think you could end your pregnancy. But others have pointed out that making abortion illegal doesn't end abortion, it ends safe abortion. It gives the kind of people prepared to break the law a lot more power. So a lot of abortion providers also used to be raped, apparently, because they knew that the girls who saw them, I mean, there'd be a mixture, obviously, of older women and young girls who saw them, and the young girls, young, attractive, frightened, terrifying teenage girls, would be at their mercy and perhaps easier to manipulate and easier to coerce to be in unsafe circumstances and to be raped by unscrupulous, criminally minded abortion providers who not only offered abortion but who often also sexually assaulted their female teenage prey. So Paul is here. It's a bit of a dark conversation, but thanks for joining us. And yes, it was a Mother Goose article that I read yesterday, and I had to have a little break after reading it because it did draw me in at an emotional level to what it must be like to be in that situation of so desperately wanting to end a pregnancy. And it made me once again be grateful that I haven't ever been in that position. But I also understand that gratitude should also fuel my desire to help other people, to help them avoid the misfortune of being legally compelled to do something that their whole entire being screams, no, that is not for me. The kind of people who call women murderers for getting abortions are the kind of people who say, well, you can't say my body, my choice, just as you can't say my family, my choice to murder them. They see that as an arbitrary distinction, whether they're in your body or out of their body. If they're your family members and you created them by having some instigatory sexual act at some point in time with a male partner, then you are legally bound to look after that family and not kill them. Every family member. And they're like, see, sometimes we're not financially able to look after the family members we have, but you can't walk away from those responsibilities. You have to stay with it. So that does then look like a very male perspective of we can be legally compelled to stay financially tied to a family. Therefore, you have to stay physically tied to creating life in that way. You have to be compelled to persevere with a pregnancy, even if you want to end it. You can't say your body, your choice, because we're not allowed to say our wallet, our choice to not pay child support. Although, of course, lots of men avoid paying child support and just avoid banks or have black market economy jobs, specifically because they are desperate to avoid participating in the care of children. They don't want to pay money for child support. Kim asks me, remember when ICE kept track of teen girls' period cycles? Will that be coming to Texas? I remember there were teen migrants and they were being monitored by a Trump appointee for the head of, I think, border control at that time. He was keeping a spreadsheet of when girls had their periods so that he could know how far along any pregnancy was and then delay making a judgment on whether or not they could get an abortion, so that by the time, without being seen to say, no, I'm banning abortion. So he could just say, oh, I'm still thinking about whether or not to allow you to have an abortion because you're in my care. And then once they're past the legal age or the legal, they're into the third trimester or something, and abortion is no longer legal for them in that state, then he can say, oh, yes, I've made the decision now. You can have one. Oh, wait, it's too late. Whoopsie gypsies. So, yes, there was a very dark motivation there for keeping track of the period cycles of migrant girls in the care of the American government. Yes. All right, so we watched a Florida woman. I didn't watch it because I was trying to hook up my laptop battery, but it sounds like she was very adamant with all the fury of early Americans choosing to fight a revolutionary war against Britain rather than continue to pay tax to Britain in recompense for Britain's military support to defend America against invaders at that point. But also feudal colonial oppression. America said, we don't have to obey your rules, pay the taxes you determine. It's oppression. We're going to fight you and be an independent nation. So being an independent nation is great, and being able to throw off the colonial yoke is a fabulous achievement for America, and America has made good on the promise of that independence and that determination. But it has left some residual quirk of a latent contrarianism that's easy for unscrupulous, unprincipled people to inflame in service of their own power. So the kind of Republicans like Donald Trump, like various Republican GOP leaders, they are interested in promoting a rhetoric that makes people angry at outsiders and determined to stay in opposition to the advice of experts. Oh, I'm tired. I can feel myself be tired, but I'm going to have a look at something else. And this is for D at the moment. Paul says, we know if men, including myself, could get pregnant, there'd be abortion clinics next to every coffee shop. Yes. So this has got 1.5 million views. Look at this guy, he's sweet. So there are waves. There's so much water in New York that there are waves making it resemble the Atlantic Ocean. And I think that's extraordinary and worth talking about. One of the most potent things we can do as individuals is build a critical consensus of people who understand that climate change exists and that climate change requires two things from us: a resolve to minimize it going forwards by drastically reducing the roles in our lives and in the running of our respective societies and nations, as well as the collective will to introduce mitigation strategies to mitigate now against the climate disasters that are happening now. Because climate change is a factor in the intensification and the worsening and the increased frequency of disasters such as these massive floods in various states. And America clearly lacks some key infrastructure. Bob, you never have to apologize for being late. Lovely to see you. Bob says the good news is that we didn't have a tornado at his house, but had 6 inches of rain in 2 hours. So was there minor flooding? Do you think people have their basements flooded where you are, Bob? I will soonish have to go for a walk, so I'm going to set my time on. Maybe 15, 12 minutes. Okay. So climate change, yes, has likely gone beyond the point of no return. So we need twofold efforts to reduce it from going to a place where it's severely hostile to all human life. We need there to be some chance for some of us, if we're still not patriotic, if we're still a little bit proud of our species and our species' ability to survive changing conditions, our ability as a species to adapt and to respond inventively and innovatively to problems, even problems of our own creation. Now, the trouble with problems of our own creation means we have to deal with our own ego. And women will sometimes tell you that men can achieve a lot, that ego is clearly a big motivator as well as a big bunch of rose-colored glasses that sometimes aggressively make people defend their own actions and say there are no problems associated with what I've done. What I've done is perfect. Paul suggests we watch David Attenborough on Netflix. He shows the effects of climate change over his own 75 years of reporting on it. That's quite painful for a lot of people to look at, but it's, I guess, the type of pain we should recommend exposing yourselves to in doses that you can tolerate. Because a lot of climate scientists suffer from low level or moderate or high depression as a consequence of knowing the degree to which humanity is in peril at a collective level. And not just peril, but the degree to which we are responsible for at least some of the death and destruction associated with current events, the floods, the hurricanes. It's not all attributable to climate change, but you can say unequivocally that climate change is driving the intensification of these type of weather disasters. Cybergrief says, can we adapt when all the trumpeters die off? That comment was hidden for a bit just because of the bots. And I guess because your comment featured the word die, which is interesting. Die is flagged for offensive content. But yes, we won't get all the Trumpsters dying off because, as they frequently point out, the death rate of COVID is potentially 1 to 2%. That's not the death and disability statistics. So there are people who are going to be disabled as a consequence of long haul COVID. There are people who are going to be disabled as a consequence of dosing themselves with the animal form of ivermectin anti-parasite medication, because it's in such concentrated form to be delivered to large animals with bigger body weights than human beings. And people will have given themselves significant liver damage and intestinal impairments because they were so stubborn with regards to the vaccine. They were so trusting of a white supremacist figurehead, Donald Trump, and so brainwashed to be in opposition to Democrats and Democratic allies, which in the case of COVID have been doctors, medical researchers, etc. Kim says, what is depressing is that progressives have warned of all these changes for years, and conservatives still don't believe facts, while an increasing number of Republicans do now believe in climate change. But we need that percentage to be higher, and we also need to be a louder and more effective counter to the other ways in which Republicans are galvanized, which is they're not necessarily galvanized about climate change. They might be galvanized by what appears to them to be a more pressing threat, which is that they fear being overrun. They fear being eliminated because unprincipled propaganda artists such as Tucker Carlson have used a theory called white replacement theory, which isn't a theory, it's a narrative. It's a narrative that helps fascists, it helps authoritarians in pursuit of democratically derived but dysfunctional democratic derived power, whereby people vote for you, but you've also lied to them in a very repetitive way that's persuasive just through pervasiveness of exposure, particularly in certain areas of America, which there are media bubbles and there are very few alternatives to the deluge of propaganda that seeks to artificially conflate migration and increasing intermarriage amongst people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds into that being a loss for whiteness, for that being a form of emotional death where you then feel bad about being white because people who aren't white have gained control of educational institutions and have gained control of the national narrative and will now make you feel bad for the actions of other white people. Will make you feel bad potentially for your own actions. So this big emotional avoidance strategy, avoiding pain of recognizing that, yes, the invention of fossil fuels, whilst an achievement, carries with it an imperiling disadvantage of inducing climate change chaos. And the other pain avoidance strategy of bringing along parents for the ride with this racist idea of you must not teach history accurately, you must lie to children about America always being good and perfect and living up to its own ideals, and you can never point out where it hasn't lived up to its own ideals. You can never point out where there's been pushback, where white people have attacked Black communities. You can never point any of that out. To do so is critical race theory. They've conflated honest history with critical race theory, and Republican dominated school boards are now trying to forbid the teaching of history in American schools, as well as Republican controlled state legislatures passing bans. So Texas today passed a ban on teaching critical race theory. Okay, I took a picture of it. Okay, so today in Texas, not only is the abortion law in effect because the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, declined to take up a challenge to that law, and that new law was written in a way designed to give the Supreme Court some cover to make it difficult, apparently, for judges to pronounce upon its constitutionality, but you still could if you wanted to. And the fact that they don't want to indicates that, yes, all along, activists were right that Brett Kavanaugh, credibly accused rapist of Christine Blasey Ford, who courageously came forward to prevent this precise occurrence, to prevent there being a rapist on the Supreme Court deciding that women should be forced to carry their abuser's child to term. They should be forced to create a viable child with the contribution of their bodies and their time and their energy. Yes, two credibly accused sexual assaulters, Clarence Thomas, who Anita Hill claimed assaulted her, and the Senate didn't hear additional testimony from other female victims, and so Clarence Thomas, a credibly accused harasser of women on the Supreme Court, one of the four people making this decision today to let Texas get away with banning nearly all abortions. It's estimated that 85% of abortions are carried out after 6 weeks. So a ban on abortions after 6 weeks, yes, renders 85% of abortions illegal in Texas. And Brett Kavanaugh and, of course, Amy Barrett, who was rushed through the confirmation process mere days after Ruth Bader Ginsburg had died. Bob says, if every one of us will do what I've done for years, just keep an eye on your local streams and wetlands and other environments, protect your neighborhood. Well, what do you do in active terms to protect your wetlands and streams, Bob? What do you have to do? Do you have to notice when it's blocked and let the authorities know? What are the active parts of your watchfulness? Kim says, what is an AK-47 beside an instrument of mass post-birth abortion? Conservatives want us to bear babies now so they can kill them later in a war for resources. Well, you've touched on a point that reminds me that, yes, white supremacists often get particularly concerned about the rate at which white women are bringing children into the world after there's been some loss of life, or if there's some concern over the demographic components of a society. Oh, Molly says, my cousin will need to be on oxygen the rest of her life from COVID. And also Molly says, I was never close to her. She thinks I'm devil possessed because I'm queer. I never want anyone to suffer though. She could have prevented it. Yes, she could have been vaccinated, which prevents most severe cases of COVID. But the thing is with the Delta variant, when there is high level transmission within communities, then there are more breakthrough cases. There are more cases of people getting hospitalized when there is just unavoidably high levels of COVID permeating in a community, and then people with weaker immune systems are more likely to have breakthrough cases that leads to hospitalization and even death. Bob is known for contacting local authorities. For an example, you say you saw a person putting stone walls in a stream and you call stream encroachment EPA, and they stopped it that same day. So Bob's very responsible about his citizenship duties for preventing damage to his local water catchments and things. That's great, Bob. Good work. Sorry I'm a bit low energy today, guys. I'm going to go pick up my kids and share with you some stickers that I'm looking at to help me cope with the emotional downside of the Texas Supreme Court development. Everything that upset me when Kavanaugh's nomination succeeded, even though one woman, a professor of psychology, someone who published a textbook on statistics in psychology in her field, even though she courageously came forward and testified, her efforts to serve her country were undone, in part by the FBA, which conducted a sham investigation and passed on tips to the White House rather than making a report publicly available on evidence to support the accusations that Brett Kavanaugh was a habitual offender with regards to women and had waved his penis in a woman's face when they were both in Yale law program. Yes, we recently found that the FBI did not investigate. They didn't call a lot of the people who contacted them to say we have evidence about Brett Kavanaugh's past, and the people they did speak to in a bare minimum effort, they passed on those tips to the White House. Which was really quite an awful way for the FBI to behave. I will say they were working for a corrupt, authoritarian-oriented, punitive administration that we now know was and continues to be prepared to incite extreme violence in order to retain access to power. But yes, Molly asks if my children like their school. I'll say yes. I'll say I was pleased for them to start the school year again. I thought they would get to be with people a little bit younger, because they're already young for their year, so that would minimize the degree to which they're the youngest in their year. But now my daughter seems a little bit, she can write stories, but in first grade, they seem to be trying to teach her the alphabet. And I was like, oh, she can write and read to a pretty sophisticated level. So one hopes they will find things to do to challenge and engage her. All right, I better be off so I can get them. I'm just going to show these stickers because, look, they say anxious but okay. Be good to yourself. Just breathe. You look great. All of these very millennial things to cheer people up who are going through emotionally difficult times. Save the world. Drink more water. These are just little hopeful things you can try and focus on when the big picture stuff is feeling a bit overwhelming. So I'm going to try and put up those stickers. I know conservatives often pride themselves on their emotional equanimity because they think progressives are alarmist, unfairly characterizing the threats to humanity or the threats to clean air or viable weather conditions. They always think we're misrepresenting the science and that we're just trying to be negative about the world. And being left to carry that rational negativity in the face of irrational conservative cheerfulness and insouciance about the state of the world is a hard burden to bear sometimes. So we have to take care of ourselves while we're still trying to not give up or be defeatist, but believe in the ability of humans to reach other humans and to find a persuadable middle so that we mobilize a critical enough mass of people to get action that helps minimize the problems that we've created for ourselves with climate change. So thank you. Molly says, love yourself and tell the people you love that you love them. All very true. Thank you for your vigilance as a guardian of the environment, Bob. Nice to see you again, Paul. And Kim, thanks as always for being here. Molly, it's so lovely to see you. And yes, same with everybody else. Take care, everyone. Bob says, here's something everyone can do. If you see someone fishing with worms, ask them not to leave the worm behind. Take them when they leave. Well, that's interesting, and we can talk about that another time as well, Bob. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Talk to you soon. And I'll get back to you with any writing that I can do, Kim, for the call out. Bob says, because the worms are an invasive species and a threat to water biomes. Great. Thanks for letting